atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where the scullery wenches remain on strike, and regrettably, this month's ration of salt pork will not be going out as scheduled. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. Delighted to have you with us tonight. Coming up on the Worst People in the Whole Wide World Weekly Update. The October domestic box office hits a new record low, and Hollywood still can't figure out it's because they keep making god-awful dog shit movies. Two crazed knife-wielding attackers wound a dozen people on a British train, but it's okay because the cops assure us it totally wasn't a terrorist attack. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, Drew to his friends, tries to acclimate himself to life as a common man. Is it just me, or does this freaking monologue get more Anglocentric each time? But first and most importantly, Kim Kardashian has cracked the case, ladies and gentlemen. She has seen the dastardly conspiratorial cover-up for what it really is, and she has officially come out as an Apollo denier. On Thursday's episode of The Kardashians, which is apparently a reality series airing on Hulu. I mean, really? It's the year 2025 and people are still watching this family on television? The legendarily galaxy-brained Ms. Kardashian boldly declared that because Buzz Aldrin is a man in his 90s who sometimes slurs his words in interviews, that means the Apollo 11 moon landing never happened. At least that's her rationale, as near as I understand it. And you folks know how this exercise works. Some low-information ignoramus sees a very persuasive YouTube video, and they are immediately convinced that the moon landing never took place. But they are such low-information ignoramuses, so intellectually crippled by their own lack of knowledge and understanding, that they refer to it in the singular as the moon landing, because they clearly are so stupid, they think there was only one. So let's grant Ms. Kardashian her central premise, just for shits and giggles, just as a fun rhetorical exercise. Okay, so the 1969 Apollo 11 landing was somehow faked. But what about all the other lunar missions? What about the 5 other lunar landings? Was it only Apollo 11 that was a fake? Did we send Apollo 8 on a real lunar circumnavigation and Apollo 10 on a real lunar landing dress rehearsal just to throw people off the scent of the fact that number 11 was going to be fictional? The reason I ask is because either way, no matter what your answer is, your theory is already well and truly fucked, sweetheart. If it's yes, then why did we build a launch vehicle and a spacecraft that were capable of flying men to the moon and delivering them into lunar orbit if we were just going to fake the actual landing? If it's no, then why did we go to all the trouble of faking 9 manned lunar flights, 6 successful landings, and 1 failed landing? I mean, what, we faked the successful failure of Apollo 13 just to throw people off the track of the conspiracy, just to make it more believable? And how do we reckon with the fact that every second of the mission audio for all 9 manned lunar landing flights exists and is available for public consumption? Did the astronauts record the fake mission audio while they were in low Earth orbit? Or did they record the fake mission audio while they were all sitting around in a motel room in Fort Lauderdale? And how do we reckon with the thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of engineering logs, which also exist and are also available for public consumption? Did the engineers know they were toiling in service of history's biggest hoax? Or were they also hoodwinked by the conspirators? And most vexingly of all, how did we convince our adversaries in the Soviet Union to go along with the hoax? Because doesn't it seem odd, doesn't it seem rather screamingly counterintuitive that the Soviets had radar and observational records indicating that all 9 of our manned lunar flights actually went to the moon and were always exactly where NASA claimed they were? Are the Soviet records all forgeries too? Or were they also paid off by the conspirators? Wouldn't they have had everything to gain by blowing the lid off the biggest hoax in world history? But we know how this all works. Moon hoax believers have never considered the answers to any of those questions. It would never occur to them to even ask the questions in the first place. And this is exactly why, in a world full of credulous, low-information ignoramuses who've never been taught how to think critically and how to differentiate true things from bullshit things, conspiracy theories are such a seductive form of intellectual crack cocaine. They are seductive and addictive precisely because they offer foolish, ignorant people a shortcut to a happy state of self-delusion where they can feel like they are smarter than everybody else and they are the possessors of secret, exclusive knowledge. Or maybe I have got this whole thing wrong and Kim Kardashian really is my intellectual superior. And speaking of people with unfounded delusions of intellectual superiority, Hollywood just had its worst October at the domestic box office since 1997. And no, there is no caveat at the end of that sentence that says adjusted for inflation. We are talking absolute dollars here. Mainstream theatrical motion pictures were only able to earn $425 million in October of 25, which is actually far more disastrous than it sounds. even without any inflationary adjustments, because the average Hollywood movie costs about 3.5 times as much to make today than it did in 1997. Back then, if you made a picture for 30 or 40 million and it pulled, let's say, 75 million at the box office and another 25 million in video rentals and DVD sales, then that was a fantastically profitable venture. That's the kind of performance that'll impel the studio to say, yep, you go ahead and make 2 or 3 sequels to that bad boy. Keep up the good work. But today, not so much. The back-end profits that used to have the potential to turn a break-even picture into a profitable picture, your video rentals and your physical media sales, that stuff doesn't exist anymore. Once your picture is no longer in the theater, you're basically in the same spot as a YouTube content creator. You sign over the rights to whatever streaming platform you're contractually required to sign it over to, and then you make a few fractions of a penny for each minute that people spend streaming the thing. And the picture is no rosier in terms of the potential for front-end profit. The big studios spend nearly all of their available production budgets today on disposable superhero sci-fi disaster movie trash, where you're spending more money on digital effects houses and 3,000 computer animators than it should cost to make the entire movie. So now you're in a world where your baseline budget is $300 million. You're spending another $150 to $200 million on advertising and promotion. And in order to make anything resembling a decent profit, you need the picture to pull at least $1 billion at the box office. Now, big budget flops have always been a thing. Money-losing box office bombs have always been a thing. But studios used to be able to insulate themselves against those flops and those bombs and their associated losses through sheer force of content. Some of the most wildly profitable, most studio-enriching films of the 70s and 80s and 90s were smaller budget pictures that wound up doing great business and making a shitload of money by getting positive reviews and good word of mouth. You get 2 or 3 of those every year, and it's easy to absorb the failure of your huge budget sci-fi action franchise movie that died a death at the box office. But the studios, in a momentous act of stupidity and short-sightedness, have built themselves a status quo now where basically everything that gets released in the theater is a huge budget action franchise picture. The small budget movies that used to function as an insurance policy against those failures simply don't get theatrical releases anymore. They go straight to streaming, and most people are never even aware of their existence. And what's the net result of all this going to be? It is going to be to hasten the AI takeover of the motion picture business. We are only a few years off, mark my words, from reaching a point where you'll be able to make a brand new romantic comedy starring John Wayne and Marilyn Monroe, directed by the robot ghost of John Ford. It will cost drastically less than the 58th installment in your Marvel DC superhero cinematic universe, and it will make more money. And speaking of people who need to make more money, it's time for everyone's favorite segment of the WPWWWWU, when we check in with our very good friends across the pond in the jolly old Islamic Caliphate of Britannistan, where the artist formerly known as Prince Andrew, Duke of York, might need to consider learning a skilled trade at this point. You may have seen the news last week that Prince Andrew would no longer be called the Duke of York. And then the news arrives this week that he won't even be called Prince Andrew anymore. He is going to be plain old Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. There is something fitting, something really quite ironic, in the fact that commoner Andy's brand new moniker has Mountbatten in it, because that very name harkens back to the last instance where British princes found themselves forcibly deprived of their royal status. Now, as you probably know, the current British royal family originated as a German royal family, or princely family, as the case may be, the Electors of Hanover, to be specific. They were imported in the first decade of the 18th century, so there would no longer be any risk of Protestant England having a Catholic monarch, and the result of that was that for the next couple of hundred years, you had half a dozen generations of British royals who also held German royal titles, and conversely, German royals who held British royal titles. But on the outbreak of the First World War, this became a rather untenable situation. The British monarch, King George V, reacting to charges in the press that he was a dull foreigner, angrily declared, "I may be dull, but I will be damned if I am a foreigner." So he changed the name of the British royal house from the scandalously German-sounding Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which it had been since Queen Victoria married Prince Albert in 1840, to the more comfortably English-sounding Windsor. And he furthermore decreed that all British nobles who held German royal titles would have to surrender those titles. The most prominent family that was affected by this was the house that was then known as Battenberg. Prince Louis of Battenberg, in fact, was First Lord of the Admiralty and head of the British Navy at that time. Now, he was probably the last guy who ought to have been suspected of being a German sympathizer, but even still, he said, "Fine, not only will I surrender my German princely title, but I will even anglicize my family name. And so Prince Louis of Battenberg duly became Louis, Marquis of Milford Haven, whose second son, Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, became the most famous of all the former Battenbergs, and also lent his surname to his nephew, the former Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, when he wed the future Queen Elizabeth II. And then Prince Philip, some years later, famously declared, "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba. I am the only man in the country whose children can't take his name." And so the Queen decreed in 1960 that thenceforth all members of the family without royal titles would carry the hyphenated surname of Mountbatten Windsor. Did Prince Andrew ever think he would have occasion to make use of that name? Probably not, but he has such occasion now. He's been deprived of his peerages and his knighthoods, thrown out of his lodgings at Windsor Castle, and now he will have to rent a room from his big brother Charles on the grounds of the Sandringham estate with no source of income except probably his military pension. And when he wants to travel, he'll have to take a train just like the rest of the unwashed commoner masses, which means he will have a non-zero chance of being stabbed by a crazed knifeman, as happened to 11 people on the train from Doncaster to London yesterday, when it took the authorities 15 hours to release any information on the identity of the attackers. And that's how we knew a white guy didn't do it, because that's just the way these things go. If it's a white dude, they tell you it was a white dude within the first 5 minutes. And if it's a white dude waving an English flag while singing Rule Britannia, then it only takes them about 3 minutes. But it's okay, guys, because this totally wasn't terrorism. It turns out the attackers were both black, and they were both born in Britain. Now, why would two black dudes stab 11 people on a train for reasons having nothing to do with terrorism? Unclear. Maybe they just both simultaneously suffered an unfortunate mental health crisis. I mean, who can say? But I guess the more appropriate question is, what would actually have to happen in order for the British cops to say a thing was terrorism? I mean, aside from a white guy being the assailant, because that goes without saying, a few weeks ago, when a Muslim dude went on a deadly stabbing spree in a synagogue while screaming Allahu Akbar, they said that also wasn't terrorism. So I guess the question that is begged is, what would a non-white assailant have to do in order for the British cops to say the thing he did was terrorism? And for that matter, a second question is also begged. Why is the public supposed to be reassured when the cops say that a mass casualty act of violence was not terrorism? Is that supposed to make the victims in the hospital with life-threatening stab wounds feel better? I mean, what? You wake up from your medically induced coma and your wife leans in and says, "It's okay, love. You were stabbed 17 times by two crazed knifemen on the train, but thank the good Lord it wasn't terrorism." Yeah, seems legit. Great job, England. But in closing our British segment this week, there's one overriding question I think we all need to ponder. Do we really want to see what it looks like when Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is no longer operating under any strictures of royal propriety? Do we really want to see what Randy Andy is going to get up to when his behavior is unchecked by any concern for the loss of his royal styles and titles? When he was already surrendering to nearly all of his most licentious impulses as it was, what in God's name is it going to look like when he is operating under no expectations that are different from those of the common commoner? Mr. and Mrs. Britain may want to consider locking up their wives and daughters, is all I'm saying. But then they have already probably locked up their wives and daughters to keep them safe from being culturally enriched by the denizens of the local migrant hotel. So perhaps it's all a moot point anyway. And with that, I am done. That is all I have got. This has been the WPWWWWU for the 2nd of November 2025. Thank you ever so much for your kind attention. I now convey you into the able custody of my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.